Sick of getting blisters? Stop slipping and just be comfortable with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Great fit, great comfort, lots of grip, and an even better price. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
If there's one thing that Adidas has done exceptionally well in 2024 with their top-end football boot offerings, it's provide options. Which is why in today's video, I'll be ranking their top 10 football boots from worst to best. Of course, keeping in mind that the reason for all these different options is, of course, variety when it comes to fit and feel, and depending on what you're looking for, some of these boots might be better suited to you than others, regardless of where they're ranked. So of course, take all of this info with a grain of salt, but if you're just interested in a pair of Adidas boots and don't really have much in the way of preference, these rankings should definitely help you out when it comes to choosing the best pair for you. And of course, if you're interested in any of the latest Adidas boots, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. And really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy these ranking videos, don't forget to drop a like on this one and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. Starting with what I technically believe is the worst top-end offering from the three stripes. At the 10 spot, we have the Adidas Copa Pure 2 Elite, formerly known as the Copa Pure 2.1. It underwent a name change, however, nothing physically changed with the boots themselves. And the reason why I have these ranked as the worst is because I feel like it's the most unexceptional of all their offerings. What do I mean by that? Well, it's a leather football boot with really just leather focused in around the forefoot and toe box area that is admittedly very soft, but also quite thin. Pair that up with, of course, this fusion skin material where the leather transitions into more of like a padded synthetic, and the touch as a whole ends up being a little bit on the bulky side through the midfoot, but super thin through the forefoot, which I find to be a little bit lacking in balance. For a central lacing system and kind of more traditional U-throat construction, the boot as a whole doesn't fit as comfortably as I would personally like them to. The shaping I don't think is fantastic, and the torsion frame sole plate and stud pattern, while not terrible, I would say is definitely the least interesting in terms of what's on offer from Adidas. Not to mention, full retail, these are gonna run you $230, which is not crazy in the grand scheme of what top-end football boots are going for these days, but for that kind of money, I just think you have so many better options, leather football boot or not. Coming in at the 9 spot is the Copa Gloro 2, what is technically a value for money option, but for its $100 price tag, I think this is a football boot that punches well above its weight, and also part of the reason why I have the Copa Pure 2 Elite at the number 10, because for effectively less than half the money, you can get something that I think offers a much better leather football boot experience. While the leather is still very much focused exclusively through the forefoot and toe box area, you still get more of it, and the leather included is just as soft and a little bit more padded, which I think offers more of that traditional feel that most people after a pair of leather boots are looking for. The synthetic leathers they've used through the midfoot, I think, match the thickness of the actual leather at the front way better than the Copa Pure 2 Elite does, making for a much more consistent touch across the entire foot. The fold-over tongue held down by the elastic strap is a cool touch from a visual standpoint, but you do have the option to cut the tongue off if having that little bit of extra bulk just isn't your thing. From a fit and comfort perspective, I think the boots are fantastic, and the sole plate and stud pattern, while on the traditional side, feels very good. Again, at $100, it is by far the least expensive boot that we'll be talking about in this video. And if you're looking to try out a pair of leather boots for the first time, but don't necessarily want to break the bank, the Copa Gloro 2 is a fantastic option. While many people consider this to be the GOAT of football boots, at the 8th spot, I have the iconic and classic Copa Mundial, which again, depending on personal preference, could be your number one. There is nothing quite like the experience of playing in a classic Copa Mundial. However, at this point in time, in 2024, the retail price of a Copa Mundial is $180, where once upon a time, you could pick them up for under $100, and it really was phenomenal value for money. And while the value proposition at $180 is still pretty decent, full kangaroo leather upper, made in Germany, but also fairly unique in terms of its more old school shaping that does require a little bit of break-in time and fits in such a way where you're not really going to get get anything similar from most modern boots, paired up with a sole plate and stud pattern that again is on the old school side with an overall weight that is significantly more than most modern boots as well. It is at this point very much an acquired taste. If a classic Copa Mundial is your thing, there truly is no replacement for it, but compared to their modern lineup, I think ranking them in the 8th spot is totally fair. At the 7th spot, I have the Predator Elite Laceless, which I happen to think is a fantastic pair of football boots. Certainly if you're into the whole laceless thing, these fit extremely well. My reasoning for ranking them lower on the list, however, is I'm not sure that there's a ton of crossover between people that really want what the Predator has on offer from a feature standpoint, but also want a laceless upper construction, where just like the laced variants of the Predator, you're getting that Hybrid Touch 2.0 upper, you're getting the strike skin rubber elements, basically smack dab in the middle of where you'll be hitting the ball for a curling free kick or a powerful strike in general, but instead of laces running across the top of the foot, you have a small section of this elasticated prime knit that actually does a really good job of holding your foot in place, given that these fit you well, because that is of course the one thing with laceless boots in general that most people have learned at this point, is that they either fit you great or they don't. You just lose out on all adjustability. Granted, I think from a shaping perspective, they've actually done a really good job with the laceless Predator Elite. However, it does have a little bit more of that speed boot profile that, again, I'm not so sure people that are into the whole Predator thing are necessarily after. The sole plate and stud pattern remains the same as the rest of the line, making for a very solid base. Nothing to really complain about there. And at $260, you're at least not paying a premium for the laceless design, where at the end of the day, if you really want a laceless Predator, this should be number 1 on your list. But if you're looking for the best version of the Predator, I'm not so sure this is it. At the 6th spot, I have the laceless F50 Elite, which as far as no-nonsense laceless football boots go, this is pretty much as good as it gets. If you've worn laceless speed boots from the Adidas brand in the past, I think this is as good as any of them that they've ever put out. From a shaping, fit, and lockdown perspective, they've done an excellent job. And of course, just like the Predators, you're getting the same sprint web and fiber touch upper as what you would get on the normal laced variants of the F50 Elite that admittedly are more popular, but again, if you're into the whole laceless thing, there's really nothing to dislike about these. You're getting that lightweight sprint frame 360 outsole with the FG stud pattern that maybe isn't as aggressive as what you'll find from other speed boots on the market, but is at the same time very F50-esque in terms of calling back to what this line has offered in the past. They're very comfortable for what they are, and at $260, they're obviously not cheap, but they're not outrageously expensive either. If you're looking for a laceless boot with a thin upper that just feels nice and lightweight on feet, there's very little to dislike about these. However, if technology and unique design is more your vibe, at the 5 spot, I have the Adidas F50 Plus, which is effectively everything you would get from the normal laceless F50 Elite. However, they're a little bit pricier at $300 and get you something pretty interesting in terms of this elevated forefoot cushioned by Light Strike Pro foam with a double sole plate, which is significantly stiffer and more responsive than what you would find from the normal F50 Elite of any variant. Does all of this tech actually translate to you performing at a higher level? No, these football boots are not going to make you faster. However, the elevated forefoot really does a nice job of putting you on your toes and giving you that sensation of feeling really fast. Of course, the fact that they're laceless is maybe a little bit of a misstep from Adidas, because I think a lot of people that are interested in this technology aren't as interested in a laceless pair of football boots, so perhaps a laced version of this down the line could be something that Adidas would consider. I think a lot of people would be super excited about that, but as it is right now, when it comes to laceless F50s, while I don't think they are objectively any better necessarily than the less expensive laceless F50 Elite, I do think for the extra $40, while $300 is very expensive, the experience of the F50 Plus and the idea of the technology is something that is super intriguing, ultimately does feel good, and I think is very exciting for what the future may hold from this design concept from the 3 stripes. Which brings us to the 4th spot, where I've picked what is easily the most underrated boot currently on offer from the Adidas brand, and that of course is the Copa Pure 2 Plus, which from a fit, feel, and touch perspective really has no comparisons within their lineup right now. Just like the Copa Pure 2 Elite that I ranked at the 10 spot, this technically has a fusion skin upper and technically features the same super thin leather material running through the forefoot and toe box area. However, instead of transitioning into a bulkier padded synthetic material, it transitions into a much thinner knit-based synthetic with, of course, that elasticated prime knit across the top of the foot, giving you this one-piece enclosure, and the difference in terms of fit and feel is night and day. The shaping of this boot is fantastic. It wraps your foot super closely and is basically everything that we love so much about some of the best laceless Copa models that we've had in the past, but with, of course, the addition of a lacing system that just makes the fit and overall lockdown that much better. The boots as a whole are super comfortable, and while I'm not a gigantic fan of the torsion frame sole plate and stud pattern originally introduced on the Nemesis, but somehow still being featured in 2024 on the modern Copa series, it does get the job done from a traction standpoint and doesn't really hurt the overall experience. At $250, they're obviously not cheap for leather football boots, but I think if you're a fan of that kind of hybrid of leather as well as knit in terms of giving you the softness of leather but also the comfort and pliability of a pair of sock boots, there really isn't much out there that feels quite like these. Rounding out the top 3, we have the Adidas F50 Elite, the plain old vanilla version, which I think the vast majority of people are going to be the most interested in. It's just one of those easy to get along football boots, a no-nonsense thin synthetic upper, a little bit of micro texturing on the surface, and a sole plate and stud pattern that feels great and performs the part at a price tag of $260. I think for all the criticism that people have had for this new F50 arguably being a little bit too simple, I think Adidas have done a really good job of capturing some of that original F50 Adizero DNA without ignoring what they've been doing over the last several years with the Adidas X Speed line. This sprint web texturing on the surface gives you that little bit of extra grip without being overly sticky. The fiber touch upper is pliable and thin without being overly plasticky. The central lacing system allows for great overall lockdown, fit, and responsiveness. Of course, the main version of the F50 that the vast majority of people will go for is the low cut model, but the women's variation you can get with a mid-cut collar if that's your thing. And as far as the sole plate and stud pattern is concerned, again, maybe not as aggressive as some other speed boots on the market. I think that F50 Plus outsole on an upper with a lacing system like this would be super interesting, but as it is, this really does feel like a modern reintroduction of what the original F50 Adizero had on offer. They're obviously not as light as the OG F50s were, and that perhaps is where they have room for improvement in the future, but I think for those of you that really were fans of the F50 Adizero series, what they've reintroduced here in the F50 Elite is just a fantastic overall package. Which brings us to the 2 spot where I've picked the Adidas Predator 24 Elite. This, of course, is the FT variation, which gives you that fold over flap tongue held down by the elastic strap at $290. However, if that's not your thing and you would just prefer something with a little bit less bulk, perhaps you don't love the look of the old school Predator tongue, you can get the normal Predator 24 Elite at $260, and they are every bit as good. What's so awesome about this year's Predator, aside from the aesthetic, is the overall unique feel that they have on offer compared to just about everything else on the market. When it comes to comparing the Predator 24 to anything else out there, there truly is no comparison. The Hybrid Touch 2.0 upper does give you that somewhat leather-like touch on the ball without being overly thin like so many football boots are these days. The rubber strike skin elements provide tons of extra grip when shooting in particular, which gives this sensation of precision and generating spin really easily, kind of like old school power boots used to be, but in a package that still feels very modern. Definitely bulkier than what you're going to find from the vast majority of boots these days, but at the same time, something that I think a lot of people can get used to, and it almost feels like they're reintroducing a style of football boots that we thought was extinct, but it now seems to be coming back, and they've reintroduced those features in the best way possible. The sole plate and stud pattern feels solid underfoot while still maintaining a lightweight overall construction, where despite looking like a pair of old school Predators, they certainly don't weigh as much as some of those older Predator models did. And again, it's just one of those boots that I think tugs on the heartstrings of longtime Adidas Predator fans and performs the part as well, meaning that there really isn't much to dislike about these. I think we would all love to see a general release version of this boot with a full leather upper, but until that actually happens, as an overall package, I think the vast majority of people that were after an old school Predator feel from a modern pair of football boots are going to be really happy with what these have on offer. Leaving the one spot to what is unfortunately a pair of football boots that has only come out in one colorway so far, although I'm told there will be more releases, the Adidas F50 Elite Messi, where the Messi variant is very different from all the other models in terms of having a completely different upper. Instead of the Fiber Touch synthetic with the Sprint Web texturing on the surface, you're getting a Hybrid Touch 2.0 material that, compared to the Predator, is significantly softer and more pliable, also down to the fact that the design of the F50 upper is much more straightforward, allowing for better pliability. And of course, you get that Sprint Web texturing in the form of these little lines running on the surface, meaning that you get a soft, almost leather-like touch on the ball with that little bit of extra grip on the surface. And then Messi's signature, and up until this point, custom only to him, burrito-style tongue made from an elasticated prime knit material, of course still maintaining that central lacing system of the core F50 design. It's still a low-cut boot. The Sprint Frame 360 sole plate and FG stud pattern remains exactly the same as well. However, the experience of playing in this football boot is unlike anything else on the market. For how light they feel, they are incredibly comfortable. The Hybrid Touch material is super soft on foot. The touch on the ball is thin without being overly raw. It has that little bit of padding to it that takes the edge off, which really gives this a nice sense of control. And from a comfort perspective, I just think it's the most comfortable version of the Adidas F50 by far when compared to any of the other variants. I'm really hoping that we get more colorway drops of the Messi version of the F50 Elite, because I really think if you're looking for the ultimate version of the F50, this is it. If you thought the 2014 F50 Adizero was the best Adidas speed boot ever, you might just find these that much better.